Now, for now coming to our message number 3. So I have the privilege of the company of very old Pryagraj and very, very close to Baba. And as I said, we will do a group discussion. So it is that when we read this message, we stop at points of time and then we do a discussion. And for that, I'm inviting my very close friends and group guys, Joel Perry, and then Gopiji, Kamakhaji, and Nikhilesh. So if you could come to the stage so that we can sit here. And I will request Kamakhaji to recite the 18 verses. We are alive. He said some kind of chanting is useful. And it need not be chanting of the Gita. It could be chanting of the Harinama Hare Krishna. It could be chanting of the Bible. And there are some people who are followers of Islam who take initiation every time. So whatever is relevant to that religion you can chant. But like Maha has suggested that one of the principles of your life would be find time to do some chanting. And because of our background in the line lineage, this is the chanting that Lahiri Maharshi had suggested for Pryagraj, for comfortable with it. So before we start the message, let me request Kamakhaji to chant these 18 verses.
जय गुरु। प्रजाति यदा कामान् सर्वान् पार्थ मनोगतान् आत्मन्येवात्मना तुष्टः स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदुच्यते। दुःखेष्वनुद्विग्नमनः सुखेषु विगतस्पृहः वीतरागभयक्रोधः स्थितधीर्मुनिरुच्यते। यः सर्वत्रानभिस्नेहस्तत्तत्प्राप्य शुभाशुभं नाभिनन्दति न द्वेष्टि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता। यदा संहरते चायं कूर्मोऽङ्गानि सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणीन्द्रियार्थेभ्यस्तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता। विषया विनिवर्तन्ते निराहारस्य देहिनां रसवर्जं रसोऽप्यस्य परं दृष्ट्वा निवर्तते। यततो यापि कौन्तेय पुरुषस्य विपश्चितः इन्द्रियाणि प्रमादीनि हरन्ति प्रसभं मनः। तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत् मत्परः वशे यस्य इन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता। ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः सङ्गस्तेषुपजायते सङ्गात् सञ्जायते कामः कामात् क्रोधोऽभिजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृतिविभ्रमः स्मृतिभ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति। रागद्वेषवियुक्तैस्तु विषयानिन्द्रियैश्चरन् आत्मवश्यैर्विधेयात्मा प्रसादम् अधिगच्छति। प्रसादे सर्वदुःखानां हानिरस्योपजायते। प्रसन्नचेतसो यासु बुद्धिपर्यवतिष्ठते। नास्ति बुद्धिरयुक्तस्य न चायुक्तस्य भावना न चाभावयतः शान्तिः अशान्तस्य कुतः सुखम्। इन्द्रियाणां हि चरतां यन्मनो नो विधीयते तदस्य हरति प्रज्ञां वायुर्नावमिवाम्भसि। तस्माद्यस्य महाबाहो निगृहीतानि सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणि इन्द्रियार्थेभ्यस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता या निशा सर्वभूतानां तस्यां जागर्ति संयमी यस्यां जागृति भूतानि सा निशा पश्यतो मुनेः आपूर्यमाणम् अचलप्रतिष्ठं समुद्रमापः प्रविशन्ति यद्वत् तद्वत् कामायं प्रविशन्ति सर्वे स शान्तिमाप्नोति न कामकामी विहाय कामान्यः सर्वान् पुमांश्चरति निःस्पृहा निर्ममो निरहङ्कारः स शान्तिमधिगच्छति एषा ब्राह्मी स्थितिः पार्थ नैनां प्राप्य विमुह्यति स्थित्वा स्यामन्तकालेऽपि ब्रह्मनिर्वाणमृच्छति।
Beautiful, beautiful. So this the group discussion, Kamakadi during the lunchtime said we should do some preparation. So how we coordinate that? And I said let us go with the flow. And that is also message 510. And let us flow in power as this session proceeds. And my suggestion is that we just read one version, one language instead of Hindi and English, because then it will be more convenient to continue with the flow. But as I said, language is not the barrier for this message. I'm sure people who are reading the Hindi version, they will also be able to understand. So I will read the message and stop at points of time, and then anyone who has anything to add from this group, we can have a discussion. So, Gita essence, as perceived by Shivedu Lari during the deep meditative process by watching the gradual passing away of his wife, Deepika, in her final stage of cancer. The most significant and revealing sentence in these 18 verses is Indriyani Indriyarthya Tasya Pragya Tishtha. So there are 700 verses in Gita, and these 18 verses are the essence of the 700 verses. And these 18 verses are 36 lines. And out of that, one line, Indriyani Indriyarthya Tasya Pragya Tishtha, is the essence of even these 36 lines. That is the importance of Indriyani Indriyarthya Tasya Pragya Tishtha. So, on this we can spend the whole session today, but we will proceed. I'll stop here so that we have a discussion on this deep, loaded line. Anyone from the four of you? Yes. So in a group discussion, anybody can do anything, any say anything. So we won't sort of control it. Whoever wants to say anything can say on the topic that we discussed. I stop that. So in this case, it is this particular matter. Is that working? Okay. So हिंदी में आपको बोलेंगे कि इंग्लिश में?
Hello? Yeah, good? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, as we get into this verse 58 and 68, the first thing we have to determine is what are the senses? Because essentially it is talking about these senses. All these 5 senses remain wired up, yet alert, like the limbs of a tortoise, and thus sensuality is avoided. So these senses, what are the 5 senses? Then what else? Hearing, touch, smell, auditory. Did I mention auditory? Taste. Now, for all senses, there is an extroversion and an introversion. Isn't it? We hear on the outside, but there is also an inner. Inner means one's own thoughts and feelings. So now we realize that the senses, instead of saying 5, there's 10 dimensions: external, extroversion, and introversion. But then, in the very sensing, how do you sense that something is hot and something is cold? How do you sense that something is hard and something is soft? How do you sense that someone is speaking very rough to me or somebody is very kind to me? What sense is that? Which one is that? So the question of sense, we have to go into it very deeply. The question of 5 senses is just on the outer, because that's what we're familiar with. But once we start going into the senses, we're coming to understand perception. How does one perceive anything? Through taste, through touch, through hearing, through sight, etc. It's about perception. And these perceptions are in several directions: extroversion and introversion. And at the core of all of these perceptions is the sense of self. Who am I? Who I am. Now, in listening or in sensing, unfortunately, we never hear what just is being said. We hear with a baggage. I hear you, but I hear you through an interpretation of my past experiences. Are you with me? So now, the question of sensing has another dimension. I do not only sense a stimulus from the outside or a stimulus from the inside, but I am sensing through to a conditioning. I'm hearing through a particular lens. Now we're beginning to understand the workings of the inner self. Now once we get this as the foundation, now let's go into the other verses and see how it takes us through them.
Thank you, Joe. This is for both of you. So आप कुछ ऐड करना चाहेंगे?
इंद्रियाणि इंद्रियार्थेभ्यः तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता। जो 5 इंद्रियाणि हैं हमारे पास, 5 इंद्रियां हैं। तो इस वाक्य में कहा जा रहा है कि उनका उपयोग इंद्रियार्थेभ्यः, मतलब इंद्रियों को जिस कार्य के लिए बनाया गया है उसी कार्य के लिए उसका उपयोग। इंद्रियाणि इंद्रियार्थेभ्यः, इंद्रिय का उपयोग, इंद्रिय का जो कार्य है उसी के लिए किया जाए। तब तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता, उसकी प्रज्ञा समझदारी प्रतिष्ठित है, स्थित प्रज्ञ है, समाधि में है। इसका क्या अर्थ हुआ? जैसे 5 इंद्रियां हैं, हम सब जानते हैं। आंख का उदाहरण देते हैं। आंख का काम है देखना। आंख एक यंत्र की तरह काम करता है देखने के लिए, एक मशीन की तरह। तो केवल देखना काम है आंख का, जिसको अंग्रेजी में परसेप्शन कहते हैं। लेकिन हमारे मन में जो विचार है, जो जानकारी है, जो पूर्वाग्रह है, जो पूर्व धारणा है, उसके आधार पर जब हम देखते हैं तो जो आंख देख रही है उसको यथावत नहीं देख करके हम और कुछ देख लेते हैं। तो यहीं से गड़बड़ी हो जाती है। केवल यदि देखना हो, जैसे एक गुलाब का फूल है, हमने देखा गुलाब का एक फूल है, बहुत सुंदर लग रहा है, तो ये केवल देखना हुआ। केवल सुंदर लग रहा है नहीं, केवल देखना हो रहा है, आंख देख रहा है, एक छवि बन रही है, इमेज बन रहा है। तो ये आँख का काम हो गया, इंद्रियाणी इंद्रियार्थक तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता। लेकिन हमारे जो फूल के बारे में हमारे अंदर जो जानकारी है, तो ये बहुत सुंदर फूल है, ये किसी को गिफ्ट दे सकते हैं, हमारे बागवानी में होना चाहिए, या पहले जो देखा था उससे अच्छा नहीं है। तो तरह तरह की जो मन का हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है, देखने में बाधक बन रहा है, तो देखना हो ही नहीं रहा, दर्शन नहीं हो रहा है। क्या हो रहा है? प्रतिक्रिया हो रही है। उसके बारे में जो मन में छवि है, उसके आधार पर हम कुछ तुलना कर रहे हैं, कुछ निष्कर्ष निकाल रहे हैं। तो ये इंद्रियाणी इंद्रियार्थव्य नहीं हो रहा है, इसलिए तब उसकी प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठित नहीं है, समता में नहीं है। समझ जो बाबा ने कहा, पहला जो मैसेज है गीता का, एनर्जी ऑफ इक्वालिटी, समत्व की ऊर्जा में होना, फिर उसमें हम नहीं हो रहे। जी
yes, with OBG and then with this.
In the Sankhya perceptions, which is there in one message, this is made very clear that the sensory perceptions that first come have no image at all. It is only a sensory perception. Even in the eye, it is no image. Image comes from memory, and therefore a baby doesn't even see everything with an image. It doesn't recognize what it is. It just it gets the sensory perception, whether it's light or touch or whatever it is. But electrical signal is all that it gets. Then the memory comes from there, and that memory is when the sensory organ, according to the Sankhya, is called is then the sensory organ that takes the form of a Jnanendriya.
So that Tanmatra and Jnanendriya, isn't it?
Tanmatra is where there is only a sensation, and then the Jnanendriya. Now, Jnanendriya has got these two aspects to it. One is where it's purely memory, and it is just perceiving it and recognizing it for what it is. For example, it may be cold or hot, as he said. The memory tells that this is called cold and this is called hot. But then comes the other part of the I-ness, where it says the cold is unpleasant and the warmth is pleasant or whatever it is. When it comes to that, then the sensory organs are not performing the way they are meant to perform. The purpose of the sensory organ is only to sense, and perhaps with the memory to classify it as cold and warm. But the choice which is coming from here inside the I, the ego, that is then destroying the, or rather preventing the sensory organ from performing the way it is meant to be. And that is what this is again coming to another aspect of the way we can say it is, that when the sensory organs perform their function naturally and leave it at that, sense and leave it at that, then that the body in which that is sensed this way is in a state of equality. That means choices. It is even right. That is how this is coming up.
अभी अभी हमने जो बातें सुनी कि हमारे शरीर में जो इंद्रियां हैं वो अपने रैशनल स्टेट में काम कर रही हैं। यहाँ सिर्फ देखने का ये है कि अगर वो इंद्रियां ना रहें तो आपके जीवन प्रवाह का कोई भी काम ठीक से न चल पाए। लेकिन हमारे शरीर की विडंबना ये हो जाती है कि हमारी इंद्रियों के द्वारा किए गए कार्य को हमारे मन के हस्तक्षेप के कारण उसमें जो गड़बड़ी है वही उत्पन्न करता है और आपके जीवन में एक असंतुलन का आविर्भाव हो जाता है। यानी कुल मिलाकर इसके बैकग्राउंड में अगर देखें तो इंद्रियाणि इंद्रियार्थे घटस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता, यानी मूल रूप से जाने तो ये मनुष्य शरीर में एक विचार शून्यता की स्थिति है। जी।
These 18 verses in the Gita are a response to a question by Arjuna to Krishna. So we said that it's a conversation, dialogue, and just before the 55th verse, Arjuna asked Krishna, what are the characteristics of one who is enlightened? How do I know? Or another way of looking at it is that how do I know that I am progressing in the path of enlightenment? And these 18 verses are a response, Krishna's response to that question. And literally in that he asks, Lord, please tell me, how does a person who is Sthita Pragya Pratishtha mein hai jo, how does he walk, how does he talk, how does he sit? But essentially, what is the nature of that person? And I think, although this is deeply philosophical, and my co-panelists may disagree with me, this is also a good template for ordinary people like us to understand whether we are progressing on the path of lying martial wisdom. Because the 18 verses provide the characteristics of what does it mean to be Sthita Pragya. So there are two words in these 18 verses. Sthita Pragya, Tasya Pragya Pratisthita bolte hain, and Brahmasthiti. So essentially, both of them mean established in equanimity. You're calm as a pond, so calm that you can see your reflection as if it's a mirror. So that in that state, that being is stable and calm under normal circumstances, not swayed by the disturbance of the sensory perceptions becoming into sensory experience that we have been talking about, and also we spoke just now. But at the same time, with full vitality and energy, he is able to do his day-to-day tasks and perform with full effectiveness. So this word, Sthita Pragya, is very, very deep, and I thought this is one way for ordinary people like us to use these 18 verses, that it becomes a I won't say a checklist, but it becomes a reference point for us to know that we are doing so much. Am I progressing? Is there any progress? How do I know there is progress? And my way of looking at these 18 verses is to give an answer to that question. I don't know if my co-panelists would agree or disagree with that.